Hola, welcome. I'm coming to you from sunny, warm Granada in Nicaragua, where today we're going to go through a Photoshop tutorial. I provided an image for you to work along with me, where we're going to use dodging and burning and a couple of adjustment layers for tone control. So grab the image now and open up Photoshop and let's get started. See you in a sec. Okay, welcome back. So we're in Photoshop now, and I've got the image open that we're going to work on, and currently we're looking at the after version. As you can see, I've got several layers here that are each doing a manipulation on the image, and I'm going to show you how to create each of those, what they're doing, and to try and finish this final edit in less than 10 minutes. If you need to pause the video and come back and watch a segment, go right ahead. Just try and keep up with me, and if you need to watch it again from the beginning, that's fine too. So, like I said, this is the after version. If we're going to look at this is what we're going to start with. Okay, so this is the before. So you can see that it's kind of evenly toned. It's got some challenges, but it's a great looking image, and I like the action that's going on. So I want to use some tone control in Photoshop to produce something that looks like this, where we're focusing more on the two ladies on the porch having their conversation. Right? So living here in Granada for the last couple of months, this is really typical street scene. So if you've ever traveled somewhere and you want to capture an essence of a place, this for me captures the essence of Granada. There's kind of a craziness going on the street, and these two ladies are deeply engrossed in conversation. So we want to feature them. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete all of these layers that I've created, and we're going to start from the beginning. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new layer that is going to become our dodge and burn layer. So go up to the layers palette and the little pull down menu on the right, you can see it right here, and choose new layer. You'll get a pop-up box that looks like this, and let's call it dodge and burn. Okay. Dodge and burn is an old term that comes from the film days when the darkroom, if you've ever worked in the darkroom, it comes from that. So it just means lightening and darkening certain areas of the image. You want to choose the blend mode as overlay, and I'll come into a little bit more of that later, but basically what it's going to do is affect how that layer applies to any layers below it. Okay. And we're going to choose fill with neutral color 50% gray, opacity 100%. Okay. And choose OK. So now we should have a layer that looks like this. So it's basically just a gray looking layer here called dodge and burn, and it's filled with gray, and it's doing absolutely nothing to our image currently. Right? That's the first step. But what it's done is, because of the blend mode that we've chosen, it's going to allow us to darken and lighten areas just using this layer. There are actually many different ways to do dodging and burning inside of Photoshop. I like this one because it's not only non-destructive, you're not editing your original layer, you're on an adjustment layer, and it allows you to do darkening and lightening on the same adjustment layer. Okay? The next thing you're going to do is choose your brush tool. So over on your tools palette, you can click on the brush, or just hit the B key on your keyboard and you'll get your brush. We want to make sure that we have a nice soft brush. So right click with your mouse and you'll get this pop-up box. You want to make sure that your hardness is turned down, so somewhere under about 20%. Okay? I'll show you what happens if we choose hardness 100%, just to see what it does. Okay? So let's choose hardness 100% and make sure that we're painting with 100% opacity. So I'm going to paint with black to start, which means it's going to darken. So black will darken and white will lighten. Okay, so this is just one click of my mouse. If you have your hardness on your brush set to 100, it gives you a very hard outline. Okay, we don't want that. We want a soft edge so that it blends in wherever we're painting, because we don't want our painting to be obvious. Okay, so right click, change your hardness down below 20%, okay, and hit enter. Okay, and you should be able to see the size of your brush by a circle. If you don't see that, hit your caps lock or your tab, because you may have just this little crosshairs showing. So hit your caps lock if that's not showing a circle. To change the size of your brush, you can right click and change the size that way, or you can actually just use the square bracket keys. So the left one making it smaller and the right one making it bigger. So I like to choose a fairly large brush, and I'm going to start with darkening first because most of this image we're going to want to darken and keep the ladies a little bit lighter, right? I almost never paint with 100% opacity because you're going to get a very strong outline, okay? So just like a soft brush, we want a nice gentle paint, okay? So I'm going to go about 20%. And you can do that a couple of ways. You can choose the little slider here and slide it down until you get to 20%. Or you can actually just hit the numbers on your keyboard. Watch what happens when I hit number 2. It changes to 20%. Okay? So the first number, if you hit 3, it's 30%, and so on. So I'm going to start with 20%, and I'm going to get a really big brush, okay? Because I want it to cover evenly. If you have too small of a brush, you get gaps. Okay? So I'm just going to start at the edge of the picture and start painting. Hold your mouse button down, or if you're using a tablet, hold your tablet down, hold your pen down. So just paint all the way around these ladies. Okay? So I don't want to get on them. You can actually go off the edge of your picture. That's not a problem. Now notice when I overlap, it gets darker again because it's continually adding another 20%. Okay? So if there's areas that you want darker than others, just go over them again with another sweep of your brush. Okay? So maybe this corner up here. So already, if we want to see what's before and after looks like, just turn that layer off using the little eyeball. So turn it off and turn it on. Already, we've made a huge difference just with that one adjustment. Okay? Now we can also, remember I said we can also lighten using the same layer. So if you click X on your keyboard, watch what happens to my color palette. It rotates them. Okay? So the foreground color becomes the background color and vice versa. Now we're painting with white, which means we're actually dodging or lightening. So I'm going to use 10% again, and I'm going to just kind of go over the ladies a little bit to highlight them just a little bit more. Okay, so once again, before and after. I'm continually doing before and after because I want to make sure I'm not going too far. I'm going to hit X again, and notice this doorway up here got a little light. So I'm going to make a smaller brush so that I can get in a little closer to them and keep the doorway and the sidewalk darker without darkening the ladies. Okay. You can also go into smaller areas like this man's white shirt and darken that a little bit more. Okay. And go in here where we got the bike tire and so on. Okay. So do this until you're happy with the overall tone. I think that looks pretty good. Do your before and after. But keep in mind that this is completely editable. You're not changing anything in the pixels of your original image. It's on an adjustment layer. You can delete this layer at any time and start over with a new layer, or you can just change to the brush that you want to paint opposite. So if you've gone too far in a certain area, let's say we've gone too far on this bike now and we want to lighten it a little bit because we've gone too far, we can't see any detail here. I just change back to my white paint color and lighten it using the brush at 10%. Okay? So nothing is set in stone. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another adjustment layer. Okay? This one was just a blank layer that we use the overlay mode. The next one I'm going to use is to lower the saturation in certain areas. So down at the bottom of your layers palette is your little adjustment layer icon here. So I'm going to add one for hue and saturation. The other way that you can get to that is up in your layers palette, right? And new adjustment layer and choose the one that you want. Okay, so I'm going to choose hue and saturation. We're going to do it as normal. And then when it comes up, I'm going to turn the saturation down. So you'll notice that it's applying to the whole picture right now, but we're going to fix that. Okay, so I particularly want to change the opacity on these bike riders, of the saturation rather, so that their colors aren't as vibrant as the ladies on the step. Okay, so I'm going to bring it down to about minus 25%. Then I'm going to mask that layer. Okay, so notice when you add a mask, when you add an adjustment layer, it automatically adds a layer mask for you, showing the entire layer. So I'm actually going to invert that. So make sure your layer mask is chosen. And I'm going to hit Command I or Control I on a PC to invert the mask. So now it's black, which means it's not showing. Okay? So if I turn it off, it's not doing anything. But what that allows me to do is go back to my brush again And when you're on a layer mask, if you paint with white, it reveals. If you paint with black, it conceals. Right now, everything is concealed. So I'm going to use my brush. So B for shortcut. I'm going to paint with the opacity about 30%, 3 for shortcut 30, and I'm just going to go over these motorbikers. Okay? So I'm going to make the brush a little smaller so that I'm getting just their helmets, these orange and blue pillows, and then a little bit on his bike. Remember that every pass you make, you're going to desaturate and apply that one more time. Okay? So I've held my mouse down the whole time. Now I'm also going to decide to lower the opacity or the saturation of the road because it looks a little blue and I want it to look a little bit more steely gray. Okay, so let's take a look at what that's doing. Eyeball turns the layer off. Now look at the biker, it's very subtle. Right? If we want to do a little bit more, we can make another pass over these guys and do a little bit more. So all that's really doing is taking the attention off the bike because the bright colors will draw your eye and putting them more back towards our ladies on the step. Okay? So it's a very subtle adjustment. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little bit of contrast to the ladies. Okay? So I'm going to add another adjustment layer, this time curves. Okay? There's some presets that come with Photoshop, so you're going to choose the medium contrast curve. Okay? Once again, it applies it to the entire picture, but it gives you a mask. So we're going to invert the mask again, Command or Control I. So it's now hidden that layer. We're going to go back to our paintbrush, and this time I want to do it just on the ladies, ever so subtle, maybe 10%. Let's go nice and small so we just get it on them. Okay? And you can see what it's doing. It's giving us a really nice contrast on the ladies without affecting the rest of the picture. Okay? Quick before and after, and it just gives them a little bit more saturation too. Okay? When you have added contrast, you actually have added saturation. Okay? So far we've got dodge and burn for tone control, lower the saturation on our bikers, add a little bit of contrast to our ladies. Okay? Keep in mind that any of these are editable. You can turn them off or you can adjust them at any time. If we want to paint more on our ladies, we just go back to this mask and we paint a little bit more. If we want to adjust the contrast, we just double click the layer and we can adjust our contrast with the curve. Okay. Likewise, I'm actually going to lower the contrast. This time I'm just going to use the brightness and contrast adjustment layer again on our bikers. So I'm going to bring it down quite a ways, and you can see what happens. It starts to get really mushy looking. Right? You know how this is going to go. We get a layer mask. We want to invert it so it's not applying anywhere. And then just paint back into the areas we want it to apply. Okay? So I've got my brush set to white, and I'm painting it, let's go 30% on our bikers. Okay? So that's going to lower the contrast here. Your eye goes to areas of bright color, contrast, and brightness. So when our bikers, which are in the foreground, even though they add to the story, our story is really the ladies on the porch. So the bikers have high contrast with a lot of bright colors. We want to tone those things down so our eye goes to our ladies on the porch. Okay? So let's take a look at what that's doing. Okay? So it's very subtle. It's just lowering the contrast on our bikers a little bit. And if you decide you want to lower it a little bit more, you can do that, or you can actually increase it. Okay? We can even darken using the same tool. Okay? So you can see how I can darken them as well. Okay? So all these are completely adjustable and non-destructive editing. The last layer that we're going to do is actually to clone out these signs on these doors. So even though they're sort of really authentic Granada, I find that they're a little bit distracting because they're bright colors. Right? An easy way to do that is using the cloning tool or the healing tool. I never do it on my original layer because I want it to be non-destructive. So we're going to go up here and we're going to create another blank layer. We're going to make sure it's blending normal, and I'm going to just call it Retouch. Okay? So I put it above my background layer, and I'm going to choose the healing tool. Okay? So it's the Band-Aid over here. Okay? You want the spot healing tool, the second one. Okay? If you choose J on your keyboard, you'll get to the same thing. If it's not on the right one, you can just pull a little pull-out menu from that tool and choose the second one. Okay? We're going to zoom in a little bit on this image so that we can see these a little closer. Okay? So this cloning tool or this healing tool allows me to select an area to heal from and to. So there's a selection area. So you hold down your Alt or your Option key. I'm going to select from the same door just above. I'm going to click there. And then when you move it down, you can actually sort of see the image. Make sure it lines up so that you've got the shadow lined up. And just click there and you should get a pretty good approximation of removing that. Right? I'm actually going to turn my hardness up a little bit. Let's try that again with a slightly bigger brush because it's quite faded out. So let's line that up again. And there we go. Okay, so really click and your sign is gone. Okay, this one took a little bit more work because we want to make sure you don't obliterate this design on the door. So we could try cloning from down here and moving it up, but I don't want to go up too high and get rid of that pattern on the door. And that's done a pretty good job with a couple of small areas. So then I'm going to use a smaller one and go in for the finer detail. Right? As long as you're lined up, right, I can actually just paint over this whole thing. Oops. See, makes a boo-boo. Okay, as long as you're lined up, let's do it on this one. As long as you're lined up, let's say here, and you line up your lines, you can just paint the whole thing. It's a little bit crooked. Right? You can just paint the whole thing and it should fill it in nicely for you. Right? So let's take a look what it's doing. So I'm just getting rid of those two little signs on the doors and it's done a really nice job. Right? Now you could do a few other things if you want to get rid of, there's a little piece of paper or something down here on the sidewalk. These are the kinds of things that I do tend to get rid of as well, partly just because they draw your attention and they're not really adding to the story. They're taking away from where your eye is intending to look. Things like this are subjective, you know, it's part of the wall. You can remove it if you want or leave it if you want. That's totally up to you as the artist. Okay? This one here, there's kind of writing in the wall and I'm not crazy about the graffiti. So I want to leave most of it because the character of the city is that it's a beautiful historical colonial city that's hundreds of years old. And of course, there's buildings that are peeling in various shapes of disrepair or repair. And it adds to the character of the city. So I don't want to completely remove all of that, just the ones that are the most distracting. Okay, so let's take a look at our layers again and see how we've done. So this is our after image now. Let's go back and turn all the layers off. And how I'm doing this is I'm using the Alt or Option key and clicking on the eyeball of the background layer. It turns off all the other layers, so it makes them invisible. So this is our before. Okay, hold that same key and click it again, and this is our after. So quickly using 4 or 5 different layers, we've gone from before to after with this image and really zeroed in on focusing on the ladies on the porch so that they become more of the subject. Right? And you can go a lot farther with this image if you decide that you want to change the saturation of this wall, for example, and you want to take the yellow down a little bit because it's taking focus away from them. Just go in and paint that down a little bit. And it actually enhances the look of feeling more old and run down, which it's really not, it's just old, right? So you get to decide how you want to process your images. If you're into textures and things like that, you could possibly apply something like that on this image because it would really be applicable with the grunge look. I happen to like it just like this, with the tones controlled and the focus really on the ladies. Okay? So I would save this now as a working file, and I do a save as, and I'm going to save it as a PSD file. Okay? So I tend to save my working files with my layers as a PSD. Okay? This one I've already saved as a PSD, so I'm going to save over it. And then if you want to print this image or you want to save it for Photoshop or anything else, you want to size it down to a smaller size and save it as a JPEG for online or email or printing. Right? And you just do that by your regular save as and change it to a JPEG. Okay? Change that to a JPEG. It's going to eliminate your layers, but it's going to give you a file that is smaller, that is workable for printing or online. So I hope that gives you an idea of how to work with layers in Photoshop for tone control. Feel free to play around with this image and share in the comments how you've processed it. I'd love to see your version. Take care, and until next time, we'll see you later. Hasta luego.